The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today is Fred Gosman, author of Spoiled Rotten and his latest book, How to Be a Happy Parent in Spite of Your Children. He'll be talking with Hennepin County Children's Services Librarian Nan Nystrom-Hilk.
Welcome, Fred Gosman. I think being a parent is probably the best job I've ever had, but it isn't easy. I read the book, How to Be a Happy Parent Despite Your Children, and I smiled and I was inspired. But is it really possible to be a happy parent with well-behaved, polite, happy children?
Oh, I think so. Part of it is our own psychology. Every decision is not a crisis. Don't expect perfection from yourself. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, although I know the definition of a perfect parent. A perfect parent is one who takes an equal number of pictures of a second child. That's your perfect parent.
You're right, there isn't one. I've got a big book on my first child. What's wrong with democracy here? Now, I know in your book you talk about that it's not a democracy in a family, but we've been schooled on democracy. We're supposed to get all the input from our children and vote on things.
I understand. Well, you know, there's a fine line. Homes are not democracies. Children want you to be in charge. I think that's one thing we should remember. Too often we defer completely to our child. He decides everything. Where we go on vacation, he selects the radio station in the car. He selects the movie we go to, the video we rent. We ask his permission to visit grandmothers. You know, if the telemarketer called and asked to speak to the head of the household, we'd probably all be in some trouble. Yes, be reasonable, be fair, apologize if you make a mistake, but be a parent. Children don't want you to be their friend. They want you to think you're a parent who knows what they're doing.
I loved your comment in there about how we're meant to be nerds.
Right, we can't, they don't want us as friends. I mean, and that's something to remember. Everyone remembers the Beach Boys song about the girl who had fun till her daddy took the T-bird away. Well, we don't want to take away that T-bird anymore. We want to be liked by our kids. We want to be friends with our kids. Now think back to what it was like when you were growing up, when we were growing up. None of us wanted to be friends with our parents. So tell me, why in the world would our children want to be friends with us? You want to have a good relationship with your children, but friendship and parenting are two separate issues entirely.
Yeah, I liked your quote about how will kids feel cool if we're not squares?
Absolutely. If we're cooler than our kids, all that means is they have to do even more obnoxious stuff to stand out. So the more bland and blasé, sure, we can show. In fact, it helps to be zany and to be a character even if you're a parent. But the reality is that it's, you want to be in charge. By the way, let me just point out, too, I am just an everyday dad. I am not a formal expert on raising children. I have no meaningful initials after my name. But recently, I spent a day and a half back in school down in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and now I have advanced certification. You are speaking with a CFRH. Now, a lot of people aren't aware of this. This is sort of on the cutting edge of modern parenting theory. CFRH, concerned father with a receding hairline. But the reality is parents are tired of theory and jargon. What they want are practical, tested ideas from other homes so that together we can bring about happier children.
How did you go about collecting these? The book is really full of some really good, like you said, practical ideas.
Sure, that's the whole focus.
How did you go about collecting all of them?
Well, as a result of the success of my first book, Spoiled Rotten, I got invited by PTAs and in-service programs for educators all over the country, and I picked up ideas. I always ask members of the audience to evaluate me. and I asked, do you have any particularly effective strategies you use with your own children? I was astonished at the creativity. There might be a dad in California who has the answer to sibling rivalry. Someone in New Hampshire may have the answer to whining. Someone in Tennessee may have children who don't misbehave in the car because of a wonderful strategy. Someone in Missouri has kids with a cute strategy so that the kids don't misbehave during the meal. And the idea is we tell our kids to share. Why shouldn't we talk and communicate with other parents so we can take ideas working elsewhere and consider whether they might be appropriate in our home?
Yeah, and the book is full of them, and I thought, some of these I thought, ooh, I could have tried this 5 years ago.
Sure, I understand. And they're simple little ideas, and yet we can try them. One of my favorite was a lady who had trouble with children at the dinner table. She saw a plastic pig on the counter. In desperation, she got the pig, said from now on, whoever misbehaves, the plastic pig goes in front of that person. Whoever misbehaves later in the meal, whether an adult or a child, the plastic pig is moved to that person. Whoever has the plastic pig in front of them at the end of the meal does the dishes. Ooh. And she said misbehavior went down 90% as a result of that simple system. So maybe we can try that idea in our homes to see if it might work.
Exactly. And like you said, that idea might work, and maybe a different idea will work too, but
sure.
Certainly
There's
having
lots
some
of different
options.
approaches, and let's concede that. That's one reason I don't think you can just say you must do this as a parent, because every parent has individual personalities, every child has unique personalities. Pick something that works. You can't say ahead of time, but we should try things simply to see. And the more ideas we expose ourselves to, hopefully the more creative we can be. Lots of times parents have trouble thinking of new creative strategies. Either they do what their parents did, or they continue to do what they've always done even though it isn't working. And this is hopefully a quick, easy way of seeing what caring families are doing all over the country. I like to think of it as sort of a peek into different homes to see how they approach common problems.
Well, you've got a lot of good common problems here with some great ideas, so I want to be sure we get to some of those.
Sure, well, that's fine.
One of them is, how do you balance the needs and the wants? How do you get rid of those tantrums in the toy store, or what things they really think they have to have?
I understand. They have to have, Barbie does not have to live better than we do. And I think that's something to remember. A child who has everything appreciates nothing, and everyone agrees with that. So we have to draw the line. Yes, give your child some gifts, but you also want to make sure he or she appreciates what she has. For example, you look at Barbie. Now there's Barbie everything, right? And are you aware of all the vehicles this woman requires? I mean, they're just, can't the woman ever walk sometime? Or look at what happens with the action figures. We go out and buy the action figures, then what do? We go to the movie when it comes out, we buy the movie, we go to the live stage show, we get the Nintendo cartridge, we dress our child like the character. Don't forget to buy the pillow shams and the bed linen, the book bag, the sleeping bag, the pencil folder, the file folders, the pasta. Don't forget the pasta. The Happy Meal. Where are the happy children? 12 action figures only excite a child until his friend has 15. Then he feels deprived. What to do about the gimmies? Go with wish lists. Say, put it on your wish list. Have children pay a part of the cost of some of the things they want. There's lots of different approaches. One dad put a list on the refrigerator of 6 toy stores. The 9-year-old could still ask for whatever he wanted, but the 9-year-old had to call the 6 toy stores to find out if the item was in stock and what it cost. Now, what do you think happened to requests for toys? They plummeted 90% because the child now had a responsibility. But if the child isn't willing to make 6 short phone calls, why are we necessarily have to buy him that toy?
Good idea. I think it might work. What about teens? Now, I've got that problem at home. The teens and the clothes.
The clothes.
And how do we fend off that? I know it's important to not be a nerd in school, but how do we balance that between that frenzy for the pump shoes and
Sure.
the right jeans and the right T-shirt that day, against them not being social outcasts?
I understand. Well, the important thing is to remember that we didn't necessarily have everything. And your child's self-esteem is not totally wrapped up in having the particular item. What does your child say? He works you over. He comes home and says, everybody has those tennis shoes, or everybody has that sweater. Have you noticed it's always everybody? It's never half the children. It's never 3/4. I mean, don't educators teach fractions to these kids anymore? But the reality is there's a simple, easy answer for teens' clothing. Put them on a clothing allowance and all your problems disappear. Anyone who has said they have their children on a clothing allowance swears by it. You decide what you're going to spend for back to school, $100, $200, $500, and let your child know the budget. Have the child decide how that money is spent. All of a sudden, they learn to say no to themselves. They'll decide whether the hot sweater or the hot shoes or the hot jeans are the priority. Some families even say, whatever you don't spend on clothing, you can keep free of charge. But suddenly, siblings of the same sex will actually share clothing, so they can get everyone's wardrobe a little bigger. And the kids will have an incentive to shop sales. So the minute we do this, and make sure you give them a reasonable dollar figure, but all of a sudden they'll be spending their money rather than our money, and they'll do a much better job of it.
And a good learning experience.
Oh,
for them,
absolutely.
too.
We shouldn't take money management for granted with kids. One other idea with teens, which I did with my boys, this will sound crazy. If you can afford to do so, I prepaid 13 weeks of allowance at a time. You know what it's like in most homes if you pay an allowance. The child asks for the allowance Sunday night. You don't have the right amount of change. The next week, he claims you owe for 13 weeks anyway. But the reality is that you give 13 weeks of allowance. Now, of course, there's one tiny little flaw with giving 13 weeks at one time. The child may have none left by the 12th and 13th week, but would that be so bad? If we have the discipline so the child isn't able to go to the movie with a friend or whatever it might be, wouldn't that be one of the best lessons we could give our children? Children need to learn to budget. Many of them will be managing lots of money when they get older. So why don't we teach them some lessons when the costs are relatively minor?
You know, that's one thing I really enjoyed in your book is that you took every incident was a teaching opportunity.
Sure.
Because I remember the first time my child was terribly disappointed over something, and it just broke my heart. And until I got to the point
Sure.
where I was saying, well, now this is a good time
And
for
it is.
me to teach how to deal with this
Dealing
disappointment.
with disappointment is critical. You're absolutely right. Trying to make your child's life perfect dooms him to unhappiness because he's not going to be able to cope with disappointment. We have to prepare our children. That's why we should give them honest feedback occasionally. If we have him in a cocoon where we think everything is going to be perfect, he goes out into the workplace and all of a sudden he has a boss who doesn't give a second chance or who expects a total effort. That could be a problem. Kids need to learn a work ethic, and I think we should require that too. That may mean that every moment isn't fun. When I give my public speaking, I bring along a wonderful book, How to Make Big Money Mowing Small Lawns. I love this book. There's actually pictures, there's dollar signs coming out of the lawnmower. For most of our kids, most teenagers, the last lawnmower they walked behind, bubbles were coming out of the lawnmower. Kids can earn 10 or 15 bucks by walking behind a self-propelled lawnmower on a 70-degree day for about an hour. 13, 14, 15-year-old boys or girls, they can earn $4 or $5 an hour babysitting.
I know.
If the kid wants hot rock concert tickets, wants the hot sweater, if we say, hey, you babysit twice a month, 2 Friday nights, working 6 hours each night, you can earn $50. That's going to help you out there. And if they're unwilling to do it, why do we have to supply these things to the child?
Exactly, because I get that. But I worked hard with those kids for that money.
I understand, sure.
Exactly. But then they make their choices. Is it really worth it?
Sure, and that's
my money's as valuable as theirs.
That's how you can tell. Budgeting is very important. We can avoid a lot of problems with kids. Put them on a budget. Avoid the hassles. There was a dad going to Disney World, had 3 kids. He knew they'd want hundreds of dollars of souvenirs, so he said, hey, each of you have $50 to spend, but whatever you don't spend, you get to keep free of charge. Well, they averaged $9 of souvenirs at Disney World because all of a sudden they didn't need the biggest one. They didn't need everything, and it's because they were spending their money rather than mom's or dad's money. And that's a concept we can use. Let's say we go to a Twins game. Why not up front say what the child can spend? You have $5 to spend, or $2, or $20. If he wants to blow it all on a hat in the first inning, that's fine. Or if he wants to decide the food, but all of a sudden those nachos at $4 a piece may not look may not fit into his budget. So I think getting children experienced in saying no to themselves is one of the best ways we can ensure their future.
Yeah, great idea. The strategy I see more often than not in the library, which is the let's make a deal strategy.
Okay.
I see it all the time. You know, and the hard part of it is it works so fast. You know, if you do this, I'll give you.
Sure.
If you do, you know, just do this right now, and then we'll go to the bakery.
Sure.
If you do this, I'll give you this sucker. And it works so fast. Tell us what you think of that.
Sure.
Norm.
Well, there's a fine line between many of these things. I mean, yes, sometimes we all reward children for doing something. And people of goodwill differ. One person's reward is another person's bribe, okay? And it's hard sometimes to truly know the difference. I think all of us occasionally resort to that. And any parent who says that he's never bribed his child is probably not being honest. But it's also true that you want children to behave in and of itself, because that's what's appropriate and that's how responsible children conduct themselves. So that always bribing and always rewarding may encourage the child always to expect something, which is not good too. And I think each of us have to find a balance. But I think occasionally rewarding or even bribing your child probably has always gone on. As long as there's a balance and as long as you require appropriate behavior and follow through if misbehavior occurs, probably it's nothing to worry about.
You had some good ideas in here about how to make family activities and people in doing things just as important as stuff.
Oh, sure.
Tell us
That's
about
what I
those.
think we should emphasize. Some birthday presents should be our wonderful family activities. In other words, so often, like for Bob, my oldest son, I have two children, by the way, Bob and Mike, 19 and 16. His birthday's in September. We have gone to a University of Wisconsin football game each of the last 15 years for his birthday. It's an expensive day. We get 2 tickets. We spend the night in Madison. We usually, historically, have seen a losing contest. But nonetheless, it's not a cheap day, but that's his present from me. So often we do wonderful activities, and yet we still think we have to get that plastic for the child's birthday. And I think we can do that sometimes. But other times, let's count as presents some of these marvelous family activities that caring parents do. It would emphasize what's important, which is time spent with loved ones, rather than that piece of plastic which we'll sell at the rummage sale. You know, it's funny about the plastic. You know, we buy the hot toys. We might spend $9.95 for something and are happy next summer when we sell it for $0.25. And we talk about all the money we raised at our rummage sale, and we forget about all the money we spent providing that inventory.
Exactly. And you don't have to sell the family activity at the garage sale next year. Saves
That's
you a
true.
lot of time.
That's true. You're investing in memories, which is the most
Exactly.
important.
And I found that with my kids too. Those are the things they talk about the most.
Sure, and that's-
Remember when we did that?
Sure, and that's true in cases of divorce too. You must resist wanting to be a Santa Claus during the difficult times immediately during and after a divorce. The reality is, children, you have to be sensitive to their needs, but the reality is kids need time. They need you to communicate their love. But indulgence is never the answer to anything. And the reality is, even during times of stress and difficulty, the children still want you to be parents, and coddling and indulging is not the answer you're looking for.
Well, now I'm going to get to the important part here, the
Okay.
real nitty-gritty now.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Chores.
Chores. Call me old-fashioned. A child who can program a VCR is capable of mastering the washer and dryer. You know,
I used that line at home
You
right
did?
from your book.
Did it work?
Yeah,
What,
it did. The soccer clothes got washed.
Okay, well, that's good. The reality is, let's get some help. You know, we want to model self-esteem for our kids. You have so many busy moms nowadays, those who work outside the home, those who are homemakers around the house with very busy schedules. Let's get some help around the house. So often you hear of moms who have a frantic schedule come home and do a teenager's laundry. There's no reason for that. Get some help. There's different ways of doing this. One family this was a family in Oregon, their teen wouldn't do chores. If they weren't done by Saturday morning, Dad started waking up the teen at 6 in the morning to complete his chores. Followed through once, the next week chores were done.
gotta
After
write that one
years and
down.
years of hassle. This is what I mean. There's ideas out there. One family, and it's real cute, there were 12 different chores that Mom basically wanted to delegate. There was a dad and two siblings. They just, and two children. The three of them, all these names were in, all the chores were in a hat. Drew out pieces of paper with the names of the chores on it, and there was a 10-minute barter period where you could try and rip off the other person by trying to exchange chores. But it makes it fun, and the reality is you can have a special time maybe every Sunday afternoon, or maybe you say to the children, hey, if all the chores are done by Friday afternoon, then Friday night we rent a video. But then, of course, if they don't do the chores, you have to deny them the video, and that's what's so difficult, because that will be an afternoon or an evening where they're disappointed, and we will feel bad, and that's what's so new. Our parents wouldn't have lost any sleep. They would have said, you elected not to do the chores, you'll have a reasonable consequence, and that's what we have to get comfortable with.
There's a piece of the chores, though, that I have the worst time with: rooms. It is their space.
Okay.
They tell me, this is my room, I like it this way. How do you deal with that?
How do you deal, and how old are the children?
14 is the
Teenagers.
one that's
Now, I have to
most
confess
difficult.
rather publicly, I am a slob myself. So that might color some of my thinking on this.
But when the critters start crawling
The
in,
critters, I understand. Critters are a problem, but up to that point, I think we make too much of this often. Close the door. Require them to close the door so no one sees it. After one of my talks one night in the question and answer period, a dad sort of somberly raised his hand and said he had a real problem. You see, his daughter was on the honor roll, and she wasn't doing drugs and had lots of friends and was very respectful, but she kept a messy bedroom. And I said to count your blessings. I mean, I think sometimes we make too much of some of these teen issues. Whether or not the room is neat, how they dress, whether they do something funny with their hair, putting too much pressure on them for grades. I mean, I think those teen years are very difficult years. I would suggest concentrating on the biggies. If they're disrespectful, if they're not doing their homework, if they're swearing at you, things like that. Constant bickering can be a problem with teens. So if you're looking at lots and lots of issues, I think it's best to go easy during those years. You want that relationship to survive. You don't want to have you don't want to say things that are hurtful. Now, if it's important to you, I mean, obviously it's okay to say, if the kid wants to go to soccer camp, for example, or wants to be driven, you have a 14, you might say, if you want to, I mean, if it's important, if the child is 14 and he needs a ride to soccer practice, you can say, just so you know, whenever the room is not neat, you don't get a ride to soccer practice. If that's important to you, you're the parent, you can decide, but you have to be willing to follow through with whatever you say.
Well, we just got a few minutes left, and there's a couple of things I want to. You mentioned the whining. There was
Right.
a solution for that.
Oh
and
yes,
that
whining.
is so important. With
One
everybody.
California dad. Do any local children whine? I'm astonished by that. A dad in California tape recorded his child whining and required the child to listen to himself for 45 minutes. Another dad in Michigan declared a whining-only Saturday. All day the child was only allowed to whine. If he said something pleasantly, he was playfully chastised and corrected. But nothing was so effective in educating the child in the difference between a pleasant and unpleasant voice. Another strategy is to pretend your ears don't hear an unpleasant voice, but that's tough to do. But if you follow through with one of these, it's okay to be zany. I love one approach regarding tantrums of a lady, her 5-year-old lay down in the middle of the aisle, was yelling and kicking and screaming at the grocery store. This woman lay down in the aisle right next to her child, started yelling and kicking and screaming. Within 5 seconds, her daughter stood up and said, "Mom, this is embarrassing, let's go."
Oh, I love it. Television.
Television. If we really want to do something about it, it's up to us. Let's quit blaming other people. A simple strategy is to tell your children from 7 to 9:30 every night they can't watch TV, but they can tape whatever they want and watch it on weekends. Now what happens, that first weekend they'll watch lots of TV, but inevitably they'll get busy and won't remember to watch TV, and soon they won't even bother taping. Resist the effort to put TVs in the individual rooms of the children. It's so tempting, especially when they're ill sometime, and you figure, wouldn't it be nice if they had a TV? But we go around complaining about how little time the family is together, and yet we put a TV in every child's room. So if you can resist doing that, I think you'll find even if you argue over the station every now and then, and with VCRs that should be less of a problem because you can always flip a coin and one will watch and one will tape. Talk about deprivation, my goodness, the poor children will have to wait maybe an hour before, but deferring gratification is fine too.
Oh, important. We all have to do that.
Absolutely.
Taking turns. Any tips on that?
Taking turns, the best strategy is to simply come up with a calendar-based system. If you have 2 children, I alternated months with my children. January and March, one child would go first. February and April, the other child would go first. Let that decide lots of things, like who sits in the front seat of the car, who goes first, other privileges. You might link that to responsibilities. It's your month to sit in the front seat, but it's your month to take out the garbage, whatever it might be. With 3 children, you can alternate odds or evens with 2 children, or alternate months or weeks. Come up with a fair system, and your children will no longer argue about that because they'll know it's fair.
And there's no arguing.
Sure.
If your birthday is an odd year, it's an odd day.
Darn right.
It's not me.
And
it's when you were born.
And if there's any arguing, they'll miss their turn next or whatever it might be.
Exactly. Well, there's so many more things you had
Sure.
in your book.
Well,
You're, I don't know, have too many times, but putting things away, did you have a
Mommy
quick
box.
tip
One
for
mother
that?
invented the mommy box. Anything left out at the end of the day automatically went in the mommy box. In this case, the child had to pay a quarter to get back his action figure. Well, the 3rd time this child paid his action figure, he had the concept down pat. All of a sudden, toys were put away. Now, people are different. Some people don't like fines. You might require an extra chore to get something out of the mommy box. Or you might say that you automatically go without the toy for 2 or 3 days. But follow through with something reasonable. And why
Consistency.
wouldn't those toys? But the whole concept is, don't yell and complain and say, how many times must I tell you to do this? Share an idea from another home around the country. Try it, and perhaps it will work in your case.
Well, there's so many wonderful ideas in here, and I think your consistency is really a good point for most parents. See what works, follow through with it. I've got a lot of good tips. My kids are in for it now, I'm afraid. But thanks for coming, thanks for sharing, and how to be a happy parent despite your children is going to help all of us have happier, more serene, better behaved children, and happier parents. That's what we're all looking for.
Right on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fred Gosman, for those very practical, common-sense parenting suggestions. Thank you, Nan Nystrom-Hilk, and thanks to all of you for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.